Path of Exile 2 is the best RPG ever made, and I believe its success will be so massive that it will fuel a renaissance in game design that will bring us into a new golden age of hardcore Big D gaming. I finally beat the PoE 2 campaign on hardcore solo self-found blind and want to give a full review of the game from a hardcore gamer's perspective. So let's get into it, starting with the pros, cons, and then I'll conclude with some thoughts about the skill system that don't necessarily fit into a pro/con framework, but deserve to be talked about nonetheless. So let's get into the first pros here, and that's just the overall vibes. So this comes down to the music, the art direction, the graphics, the feeling of clicking a button on the options panel in the interface. It all just feels incredibly on point. And that just ties us right into the aesthetics of the zone and items. Just look at how cool this item is. So I'm gonna pull out this like unique little mace looking thing. Look how it looks on my character. Look how cool this is. Bro, I have a little anvil. You can't necessarily see my guy, but look, I have a little anvil. That's one of the coolest items I've ever seen in my life. So item design, item graphics, unreal. GGG knocked it out of the park. Everything, like these look better than the PoE 1 microtransaction. So, you know, vibes on freaking point. They killed it. I mean, the music, we're listening to some of the music right now. It is just beautiful. 10 out of 10. Well done, GGG. Second point, the WASD dodge roll feels incredibly seamless. You know, as someone who's had over 10,000 hours of PoE 1, I was very concerned about how WASD and dodge roll was gonna feel. Wow, I am shocked at how good these implementations feel, and now I cannot imagine playing PoE 1 and not having a dodge roll. So incredibly good change. This was a positive iteration from the first Path of Exile game. Speaking of positive iterations, they have continued the legacy of having the best item design out of any RPG ever. And for me, I think the item system and how it complements character progression, character building, and the stat system in aggregate is the most important aspect of the game. They nailed the way items feel. You know, there's that classic meme in the classic WoW community. Oh, 4 strength, 4 stam, leather melt. No way, dude. But the reason that's a meme is because it is objectively cool to get a very easy to understand item that communicates its power so effectively. Now, to give you, for instance, this item gets me going. I see life. I see an attribute. I see some resistances. It's so clear to me what this item does and how it helps and benefits my character. It's so simple in its design, but so rich in what it's able to bring as far as a gameplay experience. And so just everything about the items, from the way they balance stats to the way the different implicits work. Like, for instance, that the mace implicits are so unique and interesting and make items feel so meaningful. And from a hardcore player's perspective, like getting each item upgrade felt great, and it was an awesome aspect of the overall character progression. So the item system nailed it. Scarcity. I did not feel like I needed more rare drops on my screen. Now, I understand that, you know, there's a certain, like, one of the, you know, the feedback loop that people expect when playing a game like this is for loot to drop when they kill bosses, and that's cool. And, you know, having a lot of loot on the ground is fun at times, but when everything is dropping shit tons of loot on the ground, it makes it so the loot on the ground doesn't matter. And so the idea that, okay, only when I kill a very special enemy or when those moments come when I get a lot of items on the ground, make it so that those moments feel very special. And so, yes, it doesn't, you know, you could make the argument that, man, the game would feel better if I was running around and I would get tons of rare items all the time from all these monsters. But I think that's wrong. I think the game feels better when there are less items being dropped because when items do get dropped that are good, those moments become so much more meaningful and memorable to your overall journey than when you're just spam clicking up items that don't overall that don't represent any progress for your character because of how popular and how many they're going to be. So I actually think the scarcity balance throughout the campaign is at a good spot, and I didn't feel like we needed more rares on the screen when we were killing bosses. Now, I will say that the reason I feel this way predominantly is because of the other systems that ended up complementing the item system so well. So that has to do with the crafting system and the vendors. These two systems really made it so that overall item progression felt consistent enough that I was continuing to change and upgrade my items every few levels, but it made it so items still felt good to upgrade. So it wasn't like I kept spam upgrading items every level. No, it was like, oh, maybe once every 10 levels I would have new items in my character. Once every 20 levels I would have a new looking character because I upgraded my items. It would be a very slow moving progression, but it would be progression nonetheless. And so that felt really good. Picking up white bases, it almost felt as good to pick up a white base of an item than it did a rare item because of how good the crafting system felt. The idea that, okay, I'm going to like just get a bunch of these white plate belts, transmute something like max life and strength, and then regal for resistance, that when you hit those crafts, it feels amazing. And so I really do think the item system from the vendor progression and just picking up white items felt like I was able to make consistent enough upgrades and character progression that it felt overall really good. I think this is the balance that the game should have. And I think if I was getting significantly more items and it was like way easier, for instance, like to cap my resistances, I think items like what I have on my screen right here, like this belt, would feel less memorable and significant to me than what they do, which is like, hey, I'm gonna remember this belt for a while because crafting this and getting these stats was hugely significant and felt great. So I think the items, rare items are in a really great spot. Crafting's in a great spot. The vendors are in a really good spot. I was able to consistently upgrade through vendors. The gambling balance a little bit too punishing. Things probably cost a bit too much gold, but those are very easy tweaks for them to be making. And finally, the last point, just on uniques. I mean, unique items are continuing to be awesome. People who remember Pillar of the Cage God back in PoE 1, I beat the game with a Pillar of the Cage God mercenary. Currently, this is the character that I beat the campaign on, and the fact that I was able to build around a unique like this and just stack a bunch of strength to get as much increased weapon damage as possible while also benefiting from the strength on the merc, whose inherent bonuses are doubled. Like, it felt awesome to be able to make a character like this and seamlessly build around a really cool item that dropped. And that to me is so much about the PoE experience, is getting a really cool drop, thinking about and then being really excited about building a character to maximize whatever it is that dropped. I got that experience out of this game, maybe even more so than the original game. And yeah, it felt great. I mean, so what more is there? What more could you want from an item system? So item system, they killed it. Crafting, again, feels great. It'll be more interesting to see how the crafting system evolves throughout the end game, but through the campaign, picking up white items, hitting them with transmutes, trying to get a lucky regal, getting that lucky regal, and then having like crafting projects to work on. So again, it feels really good to like have projects like, oh, I can't wait for more exalts to drop so I can try to get some good rolls on these gears. And this is like, I have some work in progress gear. It is nice. It's nice to have gear that I'm like working on, and I'll continually hope to get to upgrade these as I get more currency drops. Like, it feels good that I have projects to work on. These things make me look forward to these drops and make these drops feel even better to get when I'm playing through the game. So crafting feels great. And then maybe the most satisfying moment throughout the campaign was like crafting things like that. Like that was incredibly pog and cool. So crafting items, nice job, GGG. Bosses, they killed it. I think a lot of people have been making this point already where, the bosses are sick. Like the Act 1 boss fight, so cool. A lot of the Act 2 bosses I thought were equally as cool. Like the guy says like, die, 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 and throws his like fire sword around, like tries to one-shot you. Like, that's a really cool fight. I love the Act 3 fire boss, who like is literally like straight out of Elden Ring with his like telegraph axe swings. Such a fun fight. And so killing these bosses, especially on hardcore, especially blind, where you don't know what they're going to be doing going into it, one of the best, probably the best RPG playthrough blind experience I had in my life. Like, killing these bosses was insanely satisfying. The amount of adrenaline that was pumping through my system, it was like I was gambling for hundreds of thousands of dollars, but in reality, I'm just playing a stupid fucking video game. So, I mean, they nailed bosses. The only stupid thing is some bosses had just broken abilities. Like, what is this chaos like spray on this Chimera boss that just like one-shots you? Like, there was clearly some just like very unbalanced mechanics in some of these fights that obviously they need to fix. But for the most part, look, it was all very good, and they're all very, very fun fights. One quick point on melee. I know a big point of PoE 2 versus PoE 1 is they want to make melee feel like a much stronger archetype than it has traditionally been in the original Path of Exile game. And I think they've accomplished that goal. I thought the mace abilities feel strong. The quarterstaff abilities, the ones that I use the game, especially that bell thing, felt really strong. And so melee seems to be in a very good spot. And it probably seems to be outpacing spells. It seems like spells are really weak right now. I'll get into that a bit more, but yeah, it feels like melee is in a great spot. It was really satisfying to get those weapon upgrades. So upgrading weapons to make your melee guy do more damage is an incredibly satisfying feedback loop. And I'm probably just going to continue playing melee characters because upgrading those big dick weapons, slamming for 1 million damage, feels awesome. So good on them for really working on melee, and melee feels to be in a pretty good spot. Mob density, it's probably a minor point, but playing through the campaign, it felt like there was always a perfect amount of mobs on my screen, to the degree that it was both challenging, but at the same time it felt fun, and I was always engaged with the amount of mobs on my screen. So just the small point, but again, should be recognized. I thought they did a really good job balancing mob density throughout their zones. Passive questing rewards were a big question mark going into PoE 2, but I think that the passive questing reward, like the 10% cold res that drops off the first boss in Act 1, it feels good. It feels good to get those drops, click the item, and boom, my character has 10% cold res. The only thing that makes it feel a little bit bad is that when you kill bosses that don't offer permanent passive upgrades, those feel a little bit like meaningless. It's like, okay, why am I killing the magma boss in Act 3 when he doesn't drop any permanent upgrades for my character? It's like, I probably wouldn't. So it almost like makes those bosses stand out more because they're even more meaningless to kill. But anyway, that shouldn't take away from the fact that it does feel good to kill the bosses that do drop the good things. So anyway, moving on to the fact that zone side area. So, another big change from PoE 1 is that they're trying to make a little bit more interesting and zones that are dynamic and have things going on in them. And I think they accomplished that because it really did feel rewarding to like explore a nook and cranny in some zone, find a bunch of rare chests, and then opening those rare chests tended to be the biggest kind of loot drops that you would get throughout progressing through a zone. Relative to like killing a unique boss, and that was really it. Killing rare monsters didn't particularly feel that rewarding, whereas like opening rare chests, like you just click the button, you had a bunch of loot on the ground, felt good. So they did a good job of making it so that when you actually end up in one of these side areas, it doesn't feel like a waste of time. It actually does feel rewarding, especially on like HC and stuff like that. So I thought the side areas were cool. Pause core. So they changed the way the logout works, obviously in the hardcore, to where now the meta is you hit escape and your game will enter this pause state instead of automatically logging you out. I think this is a great change from the hardcore gameplay perspective. It feels a lot more ethical on boss fights, to when you're in a situation where you're screwed and you need to like reset the encounter, you can just, okay, I'm just gonna reset and like return to checkpoint. That seems like a fair way to go about it versus the old school in PoE 1, which is like you just log out, which was like a little bit, it just from a playing the game perspective, it looks weird and feels weird, whereas the feeling of hitting pause and hitting the return to checkpoint, it feels more gamey. It's kind of a weird point, and unless you're like a hardcore gamer, you're probably talking about resonating with you, but I do like the change here. Log out macro bad, pause macro good. It's short. The campaign length and difficulty was perfectly balanced. I got to Act 2 cool on this character in about 6 hours, which I thought was the appropriate amount of time, especially for someone that's new to playing a campaign. And I imagine that this is only going to be quicker as people get better and better and become even more, recognize the zone patterns even more. So I didn't get the impression that this campaign was a lot longer than the first Path of Exile campaign, for instance. And also the difficulty, it felt very fair, other than chaos damage. But throughout the campaign, it always felt like the difficulty of the zones were always fair, except for chaos damage, which we'll get into. And then finally, last point on the kind of changes that I thought were really good, the minion system. Spirit is an awesome mechanic for minions, and makes it minions feel really good. I really like the Spirit, the auto revive stuff. Really well done for minions, and big W from GGG. All right, so these are the pros. I mean, just the short and sweet of it is that they had a recipe for success with the original Path of Exile game, and all they did was iterate on the things that made that game great and made them even better. And so there's really not much else to say than wow, what an impressive work of art as far as this game is concerned, especially with things like the item system, the crafting system, and the bosses. I mean, these alone just make it for it to be easily one of the greatest games, if not the greatest game ever made. But there are some cons, and I'll go through these a little bit quicker than the pros because they're pretty self-explanatory, and I think a lot of these are known by the devs themselves, and I'm expecting a lot of these to be changed massively throughout early access. So the first thing that is by far the biggest pain in the ass playing hardcore, and it just felt straight up stupid to the point where it's like not fun, is chaos damage. So there are certain zones in Act 3, really it's like by the Viper zone specifically, where they just start giving a bunch of added chaos damage to normal mobs, and it's just so unfun to be in a zone where a normal white mob is more scary than a rare in every other zone before it. The fact that these normal white chaos mobs auto attacks are dealing like a quarter of my HP on like one of the tankiest characters I ever built is unfair, makes it so the game is worse for those things being in it, and the amount of damage chaos is doing versus how available chaos resistance is just not balanced. And this scarcity or the amount of damage it's doing, one of those layers is broken, and they need to fix that because chaos res is too scarce, or chaos damage just does too much damage, and it just feels horrible. So GGG, fix chaos damage. Holy. Spirit for auras feels kind of bad. I was in a situation with one of my characters where I had spirit on an item, and in order to not use that item anymore, I had to like switch auras, and it felt bad having to switch out my auras depending on which items I was using. And I get it in the context of minions, but it just felt really bad that my items were dictating what auras I could be using in such an extreme way. Maybe that's something I'll get used to, but it felt kind of bad. Curses. The curse change felt so unnecessary. I don't know who was going around saying that, oh wow, Path of Exile 1 cursing is so OP, we gotta like nerf cursing. It feels really bad that you put some like AoE skill shot on the ground that mobs have to stand in for a certain period of time, like, and then they get cursed. It just felt like a very clunky system that, like, for no reason, like, why did curses need to be changed? Like, GGG, fix curses, like, bring back old curses. I don't like new curses. Getting moved by a big charging guy is so dumb and feels like old school desync back in the day. Theoretically, I get it. Like, okay, it's a big monster who's charging at you. Your character probably should be moved out of the way to some degree, but the current implementation, it just feels a little more buggy than anything like the natural like gameplay mechanic. So something that really probably should get looked at, and I'm expecting this to feel much different later on. Why the fuck are normal mobs leaving ground one-shot abilities on the floor? Like, I could not get over the fact that there were these river hags mobs that were legit like spamming one-shot pools on the ground that my melee characters just weren't allowed to stand in. And the whole point of my melee character's abilities are like zone control. I'm supposed to like put something on the ground and like control that area of zone, but I can't do that when these normal mobs are leaving one-shot floor fucking things. Unreal. Fuck that zone in Act 3 that have those river hag zones. Fuck normal mobs that leave floor effects that just one-shot your character. This shit's stupid, man. GGG. Why is this a thing? Normal mobs should not be doing this. Fix your game. Okay. The passive tree's not ready. Obviously, we kind of like going into it, I probably would have assumed that the passive tree would be the most unfinished aspect of the game. I'm not like railing on them for like an unfinished passive tree, but like it's very clear that the passive tree is unfinished. There's a lot of just kind of funky balance things with a lot of the nodes, and I'm sure the passive tree is going to look so much different come the actual release and all that stuff, and I expect it to. So you know, it is what it is, the passive tree, but it's obviously just very unfinished at the moment. That might lead into why spells feel super weak. But spells just feel super weak. The fact that you're not passively getting power through gem level through just killing things means, so once you get to that level 14 gen level, at least my experience in Act 3 Cruel was that if your spell damage build just wasn't doing damage, and you weren't able to get through like the Act 3 magma boss like I was, like what options do you have to like get more damage? Like upgrade your weapon, which doesn't really feel that significant on a spellcaster, or like rebuild your passive tree because you obviously screwed something along the way and you just can't do any damage. So I got to a point where I felt like spells were just like super weak, especially relative to melee, where you could just farm out a big fizz damage weapon and all of a sudden you're going to be clearing screens and mobs again. So spells felt bad, but that might just be a skill issue. Ascending feels less flavorful and cool in this game than it did the original Path of Exile. I'm not a big hater of the Trial of the Sekima or the Vow thing, but they're just worse than old school Ascendancy, which is fine. Like, and that might be like a hot take or whatever. But Izario was one of the coolest NPCs in the original Path of Exile. Like his voice lines were some of the most memorable voice lines you had playing the game. The zone itself was very flavorful and had a cool theme to it. It's like the trap area. And I think the game is worse off for not having lab. And these other ascending mechanics are fine, but they're just very much like afterthoughts. Like I'm not looking forward to doing a Trial of the Sekima. Like I'm not looking forward to doing a Vol thing. And like I wasn't looking forward to doing lab. So I mean, I don't understand why they felt the need to really. This was not a positive iteration. Like they didn't add anything to the game by not making us run lab to ascend and instead making us do this stuff. So honestly, probably the change I'm most critical of, because it actually was probably one of the only step backs they made in the entire kind of Path of Exile 2 release. So kind of a weird point, but just doesn't feel great. Give me at least one movement ability. So this, like, I get it. I get that they don't want us just moving around the maps, leap slamming everywhere, and I totally agree and I totally get that. But not being able to navigate laterally, like, so I'm on a ledge and I want to jump down to the bottom ledge, I could just do that. But now I have to like go to find the stairs and I have to like go walk down the stair. Like that feels bad. So the movement abilities to traverse terrain like laterally or like jump across a ledge, those feel super satisfying, and those should be in the game. I want those abilities, so it feels a little bit too punishing not having those abilities. So that's where we are there. Charm just feels like another mechanic that just feels very unfinished. It's very unclear to me. I like that these effects are automatically being triggered, and that's a huge element that makes them viable. But especially playing through hardcore, it's not like I can ever use a character that's going to rely around non-permanent uptime effects, because look, as soon as I get frozen, right, I'm just going to die. So on hardcore, like all these effects need to be permanent, and like it's by no means clear to me that I'm going to be able to have permanent uptime with my charm usage. Even when charms are being activated and not activated, it's like very unclear to me what's happening. And then all of the suffixes and prefixes on belts that affect charms just feel like wasted suffixes and prefixes. So the charm system just needs a little bit more work. It's very uncompelling to me right now as a hardcore gamer. I do not care for charms. I mean, they're fine, they exist, but there could be so much cooler things with the system. It's just very clearly not there yet. All right, last point, just some thoughts on the skill gem system. That's neither pros or cons, but just kind of more higher level thoughts, because I really do think that their higher level objective of making Path of Exile a game where you're using more buttons than just your right click is a worthwhile pursuit. And their implementation of the current skill system by making us click more buttons is good. It feels good to click a big cooldown button and see a boss chunk. I like that. However, there are a lot of kind of quirks with the just progression, I would say, of how skill gems work right now that I think they're gonna have to improve and iterate on a lot till it gets into like its final finished state. So for instance, like when you're upgrading gems throughout the campaign, going from like a level 7 to like a level 8 gem, I feel absolutely nothing clicking that upgrade button that says, okay, now your gem's level 8. Like to me, I get there's no clear communication of how much more power I'm getting from doing that. It doesn't like feel anything. I do not feel like I'm progressing a milestone or anything. It just feels like generic and very blah. So upgrading gems throughout the campaign made me feel nothing. And tied to that, when I was playing like a spellcaster, getting no power through passive farming through my gems felt bad. Like I want to be able to sit in a zone forever and acquire more power through that zone, but the fact that I can't through gem upgrades because I'm gonna just get locked by the gem level of the zone that can be dropped, and I'm not just passively getting gem XP, like feels bad. So I think I preferred the way that gems used to progress and level than this like gem dropping system that we have now. The other thing that feels weird about the skill gems is that there seems the power imbalance of later skills versus the early ones. It feels almost like inappropriate for how I used to think about like Path of Exile game design, where I could take a skill like Earthquake and make it to be the as good as any other skill. Like I can be the Earthquake guy. But in Path of Exile 2, especially in the Mace example, it's like Hammer of the Gods is so much far and away a better skill than Earthquake that I feel stupid for using Earthquake. So the power differential of like the later on versions of skills versus the early ones is imbalanced and doesn't feel good, because it just feels like, okay, like my character's is not going to be complete till I get to the level to where I can start using Hammer of the Gods, and then I'm gonna like one shot my entire screen. I would rather to have a more flatter progression curve so that like I can make my Earthquake as good as Hammer of the Gods when I get to the time where I can use Hammer of the Gods. The fact that that seems like it's impossible just feels bad, and that also doesn't seem like the way that philosophically skills should really work. Supports seem fine. I don't have too strong of opinions on supports, other than the fact that the limitation is definitely good. If we were able to slot more than one of the same support gem, like I know, for instance, all my skills would look incredibly similar in samesies. So this limitation has made it a lot more interesting to flesh out gem choices and all that stuff. Now, I am a little bit unsure how the skill gem will feel in the end game, given that I just got to maps on my solo self on a hardcore character and haven't really been exploring that aspect yet. And I'm coming from the original like closed beta Path of Exile 1 game, where in order to get chained, for instance, 15 years ago in the first Path of Exile game, you had to farm Act 1 ledge over and cruel over and over again until you got the chain drop. In order to actually like get the gem. So, and I like that. Like I kind of like the idea of having to grind for gems and gem upgrades in general. So I actually think I will enjoy this system the more I get into the end game and start like needing the higher level of gem drops. But at least throughout the campaign, the skill level of gems felt incredibly arbitrary, and upgrading them made me feel like absolutely nothing. Anyway, that's my rundown of Path of Exile 2. This is by far and away the greatest RPG ever made, and I think with a few more months of iteration, this will be the greatest game ever made, and will harken in a new era of golden age of gaming, where kind of old school design philosophies of 4 strength, 4 stamp, leather belt will finally take root in popular culture again, and hopefully my kids won't be playing World of Warcraft when they're when they're looking for an MMO to play, and we finally get the new best and greatest thing. So anyway, that's the review of PoE 2. If you guys would like to see us experience the end game and develop some thoughts around that, we'll be live twitch.tv/heartache. Follow us. Thank you for watching. Peace.